then I'm going to go ahead and start recording. So I appreciate you all being with us tonight. So as with our calendar and course outline, today is the evening where we are discussing brain and behavior. So I have a couple of slides that I wanted to go over, and then we will have our student presentation, and then we will go into office hours, and then that's it. So we will be together until 7 p.m. Central Time. A couple of housekeeping things. I wanted to just open up the floor for general questions and highlight that I know a few of you are still having issues getting onto the collaborations documents. If you are still having issues, please send me an email, and I will go ahead and manually add you to that. It doesn't seem, for some folks, it still is, even calling OIT and all that good stuff is still not working. So please just email me, let me know, and I'll make sure that you can get access. I think I granted access to about 3 or 4 students today. So just know if you're still having that issue, you're not the only one. Apologize that that's been not as smooth sailing as I was hoping it would be, but I think for some folks it was really smooth. So we'll just move forward with that. Also, just a clarification on the CTEs and the group presentations. All of you do have access to go ahead and upload your CTE. Some of you all have already done that. If you've already submitted your individual 300-word CTE under the assignments tab in Canvas, I will grade those on a rolling basis, and that should take a couple of weeks. If you have not, just make sure that you're paying attention to the due dates in the course outline. I did revise the due dates for the quizzes as we talked about last time. I gave you a few additional days, but the due dates for the individual CTEs each week have remained the same. So if you want to turn in your individual CTE for this week, it is due tomorrow by 11:59 p.m. Central Time, and all of the due dates in this class, which are only the quizzes and the CTEs, individual CTEs, are all 11 p.m. Central, or 11:59 p.m. Central Time. And that 1 minute does matter. So please make sure that you're taking that into consideration when you complete your quiz. The first quiz 1 is up. It's been up for a little bit. I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but again, that is due this coming Sunday, September 24th by 11:59 p.m. and it covers units 1 through 3. So the first few weeks of this course. Those are all I believe all my housekeeping questions. Are there any general questions about the course so far? Anything else? Any Canvas issues? Oh, I did have one other thing I wanted to clarify about some of the links to the videos. I've gotten a couple of emails about students having trouble accessing some of the videos. If you are trying to access a captioned link and you do not have a accommodation letter from Student Disability Services, you will not be able to access those captioned links. They are the exact same videos that are provided to you. So if you see a link, and what I do is I just put it underneath, I put the captioned link underneath the same video, and then I indent it a little bit. So just know that's not 2 separate videos. That's just a captioned version of the original video. So if you're able to access that original video and you do not have a SDS accommodation letter, then you're fine. You're good to go, and you don't need to access that captioned link. But as always, if you have any problems accessing any of the videos, let me know. Sometimes it's a browser issue, and you can just switch browsers and see them, or things like that. So I believe that is officially all of my housekeeping comments I wanted to make. So I'll open up the floor. Are there any questions about anything you all wanted to touch base on before we get started?
I did have issues opening up the Joe Strong videos. I did email you about those. Are those required to watch, or because I still can't open those?
You still can't open them, and it's not the caption link, because I think some of those It's not.
Not the Joe Strong videos.
Yeah, those are really short. Yeah, I would like you to see those. They're not, they're like 2 minutes. So it's not like in terms of content, it's not like a 50-minute documentary. But does anybody else have had any problems opening that link?
I had an issue with one of them, but I was trying to view it off Safari, and then when I went and did it off of Chrome, it worked.
Ah, okay.
You might want to change the whatever internet server.
Yeah, the browser. Can you try that and let me know if that works?
Yeah, because I am using Safari too, so that might be.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Thank you. Yeah, let's try that and then see if that works. And like I said, a lot of times it is the browser window, especially with doing things like downloading PDFs. Sometimes that's a problem, and that is a browser issue too. So that's a good troubleshooting thing to try before calling OIT. But again, if you try all those things and you still can't access stuff, please let me know. I'll do what I can. But usually it unfortunately means referring you to OIT because I can't really help you in that regard. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I wanted to check in. I believe that you all were able to view the recorded lecture from Dr. Combs-Orme. So I am not going to, go over that, but I did want to kind of highlight a couple of kind of concepts and slides and talk just a little bit about some of the slides I think that are in my PowerPoint that she did not cover in her recorded lecture. But if you have any general questions about what was covered in her lecture, please let me know, especially if you want me to highlight something specifically. Now is a great time to tell me that, and I can try to focus on that as much as I can in the time we have. So was there anything that she covered in that lecture that you want me to specifically focus on or highlight? This is your time, so let me know if there is. All right, if not, we can save it for the office hours if you still have questions. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Very glad that so far I'm able to see you all and hear you. So I know she covered this slide, but I just kind of wanted to jump in here and talk about some of these differences. So we know that we have that these first couple of years of life are just really, really, really intense times of very rapid growth and development. And this is one of my favorite visuals that really explains the difference in neuronal density from 3 months, where we just essentially have what I kind of call the eating, sleeping, and crying neural connections. I mean, there's just not a whole lot going on at 3 months. You're sleeping for for most of the day. You're not awake very many hours of the day, and your experiences are not that varied. Like I said, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're being changed, hopefully regularly, and you're crying a little bit. You're learning to communicate with your caregiver through sounds and cues and things like that. But there's not a whole lot going on, and that's very clearly visually represented here. And so by the time you're 6 years old, you're just all over. This is Thomas the Train and My Little Pony and, whatever else, Frozen. There's just all kinds of stuff going on here that, that happens before 6 years of age. You have started school, you've perhaps gone to daycare and then preschool and pre-K and kindergarten, maybe even your first grade. I think I was in second grade when I was 6. So, there's a lot happening here. So, but then we go through this really massive, pruning phase, between these times that are kind of our densest connection in the sort of first years of life, and then, in adulthood. My Little Pony and Thomas the Train and, you know, Sesame Street and whatever else we were in love with when we were little, just it ceases to have the same importance. And we go through that really natural and organic and totally appropriate, you know, pruning process where those connections are severed. They're not reinforced. And so they essentially kind of wither and die. And the ones that are really important, they get strengthened. And all of this is based on experience. And so kind of what triggers all of this to happen? It really is, as I said, these experiences. And you can have, you know, the quality of the attachment that you have with your caregiver is absolutely critical. And it's very, very important that that attachment process is strengthened through responsive parenting. You know, there's a lot of things that kind of come into play here with parenting that I don't think Dr. Combs necessarily got into too much detail with in her lecture, but you know, how you parent is very much governed by the society that you live in, by the way that you were raised, by your family of origin, sometimes even your geographic location. So there's a lot of variety in how people raise their children, and it's not always based on, you know, what we know about science. Like the common practice, you know, just isn't sometimes the best thinking at the time gets updated, as I kind of talked about in the first lecture. You know, people used to think that autism was the cause of autism was because of these, you know, so-called refrigerator mothers. I don't know if any of you all have heard of that before, but essentially that these moms were cold and basically they caused their children to have autism. You know, there's still, you know, ongoing, you know, research around the causes of autism. I just saw an article literally, you know, 5 minutes before we jumped on here today that was talking about the epigenetic mechanisms that are relevant to autism. So it's like, you know, that research is ongoing, but we do know that it's not because, you know, moms specifically, not parents, but that mothers specifically were, you know, cold. So, you know, our understanding of, you know, what causes people to do what they do is ever changing. It's ongoing, but what we do know for sure is that this consistent, sensitive, and responsive parenting is very, very important. Some things that we see a lot of times are, you know, we're told to, you know, maybe let babies cry it out. I don't know, has anybody ever heard that term before, that whole idea, you know, you should just let babies kind of soothe themselves, like self-soothe. But one of the biggest issues with that is that babies learn how to self-soothe and emotionally regulate by being soothed by their caregivers. So if they're not experiencing that, it's very difficult for them to learn how to do that. And all of that really kind of occurs through this attachment process, and attachment influences the architecture of the brain. We will do a deep dive into different attachment styles when we get into infancy and early childhood, but it's a major foundation of the way that the brain develops. So that's why we're kind of touching on it here. And good attachment, healthy attachment, helps with the development of focus, emotion regulation, and exploration of the environment. You know, if you have a secure base, you feel a whole lot more comfortable going out and experiencing the world. A lot of times, you know, our environment creates our experiences, and things like violence, noise, disorder, an irregular schedule, unpredictable caregivers, all of these things generate stress for an infant. And that is very, very different, and is going to have very different outcomes than if the experience of our environment is calm. That there's positive affect, you know, that our caregivers are smiling and cooing and, you know, doing all of that kind of motherese, like the woman in the linguistic genius of babies kind of showed. That was interesting to see the Japanese motherese versus the American motherese. And things like a predictable routine really helps to decrease that stress, so that our amygdala, part of our limbic system, is not, going off with that kind of 5 alarm fire all the time. They know what to expect. They know if they cry that someone's going to come and pick them up and tend to their needs. They're going to change them when they're wet. They're going to feed them when they're hungry. All of that, develops these really, it helps to strengthen those neural connections. And what eventually forms our kind of core belief structures and how we really move through the world. Is the world safe? Is the world unsafe? We want orderly, clean physical environment. Don't want these kind of physical hazards running around, going on in the environment when babies are starting to crawl and explore. So very, very important. Wanted to touch on the, I'll just stop there for a second. Are there any questions before I jump into this piece? Okay. So experience expectant and experience dependent. These pieces are just kind of general pieces for you all to understand. Experience expectant, these are these things that we literally expect to happen in all humans. They are common to our entire species. We expect that if you are born without any physical malformations or anything going on with your hearing or your auditory cortex or anything like that, we expect that you're going to be able to to see, to hear. We expect your sensory, stimuli to be able to be processed by your brain. These are just things that are just going to be common to everybody. 10 fingers, 10 toes. This is typically what we expect. There are more critical periods related to this experience expectant time. They're most often related to these sensory and motor functions, and they are designed to set up the relationship between the brain and a reliably occurring environment. So we are essentially wired, we're kind of born with the hardware, we're born with almost all of the neurons that we are going to have in life. And so they're really just kind of ready and waiting for them to be shaped. It's almost like our brains are like clay, and that they're just, we're waiting for those hands to just kind of, mold them into something, something unique. Obviously genetics is going to, perhaps the analogy there is about the, maybe the consistency of the clay or the quality of the clay or things like that, who knows. But it's, it's the environment is really what shapes how our brains really wind up. It is this experience that, that we really get through interacting with our environment that shapes our brains. So some of these experiences are dependent on are unique to cultures and individuals. They're designed to interact with the flexible demands of the environment, and they are most plastic. So we can have a conversation about kind of what kinds of experiences are really needed. Do we need baby Mozart? What is the evidence behind that? Do we need museum trips? Do we need to read to our baby from the time that they are out of the womb before they can even really, visually focus on the words on a page? How do we determine what really matters? And we do know that babies need safe, stable, and nurturing environments to really reach their full potential, especially in their early years. But what does that actually look like? What do we need to create a safe environment? What do we need to create a nurturing environment? And are all of these, add-ons and expensive toys and gadgets and all this kind of stuff, are they really needed? So what we do need is consistent and sensitive and responsive care. We want to show that, that babies, when they express a need through crying and kicking and, moving their bodies, that those needs are going to be responded to in a sensitive way. And, we're not shaking babies, things like that. And that they're met in a timely manner and in a consistent manner. And language is, it's mission critical. One of the things that I used to work on a lot when I was with the state was around kindergarten readiness and early childhood development and kind of, policies, what is really needed. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was that, you can get the benefit and you can engender healthy attachment and healthy development with your infant through the act of reading, even if the mom or the caregiver is illiterate. Even if they don't know how to read, there are still benefits to sitting down with your child, opening up the book, and pointing and interacting. That serve and return process is absolutely critical to healthy development. And so there are things that can happen, and there are successes that can be achieved, and milestones that can be achieved, and potential that can be reached even when you have even when you're raised in adversity, or you're raised by someone who can't actually read, just talking and using those words and using those language, that's what's generating these neural connections. The way and the quality of this care helps to develop the secure base, and the secure attachment influences the architecture of the brain, like I mentioned earlier, and we will jump into that more in future units. So attachment and development of attachment is part of survival. It's a system of behavior that's designed to keep the infant in close proximity to the caregiver. So there's these wash of hormones that's going on in the mom's brain, and that is, it makes the mom want to care for the child. It kind of helps to motivate it. It's really this kind of bidirectional process. The attachment relationship is the basis of emotional development, and it provides a template for future relationships. This part is absolutely key to all of the future clinicians in this course. If you have not heard this before, I know many of you all maybe psychology majors and things like that, or have other child and family studies. You have definitely seen the research around attachment previously, but if you have not, please make sure that you pay attention to this piece right here. So many of the clients that you will see in your practice will have issues that are presenting in adulthood that are related to the quality of their attachment relationship when they were very, very young. And as I said, we will get into some of the more details about attachment in future courses. Okay, so I'm going to run through this, and we will get into the HPA axis and stress response all next week. That unit is already up for you all. You can dive in as soon as we're done with this if you haven't already. So I won't spend really any more time on this now, but I just wanted to touch on this piece here, that really attachment seems to be the how of brain development. The infant forms this attachment with the caregiver through this serve and return, which is actually one of your frameworks concepts. The serve and return, this kind of sensitive and responsive meeting of her needs. So, the infant throws out a cue, and the mom or the caregiver or the dad, whoever is there, is responding to that cue. That is telling the baby's brain, okay, pay attention to this. And all of that language, again, it's like those babies those infants that are taking statistics on what they're hearing. They're also processing everything that's in their environment. So that serve and return is shaping this attachment, and it's helping the infant to understand when they're safe and when they're not safe. All of those facial cues are critically important. And that safety and that secure attachment is critical, because it's that security that helps the infant to understand and know that the environment is safe to then go explore. And the more that the baby goes and explore, the more the wider the variety of experiences and the more neural connections that are made. So that hardware starts to be shaped and starts to be developed by essentially all of those environmental experiences. This is an article that you can read if you haven't already about Romanian orphans. I'm sure many of you all have heard of this research before, but we learned a lot, unfortunately, about brains and brains development by looking at what happens when things don't go well, rather than when things go well. And this is a link to an article that talks about some of that research. And like the Bruce Perry article, he has done extraordinary work in studying the brains of children who have experienced abuse and neglect. So I want to close out here by having a conversation with you all, and I want to hear from you. I'm going to make sure, I hope my sound didn't go away. I can't hear any of y'all. So speak up, please. Let me know that I can still hear you. So let's play this game, required or optional. So I want to hear from you all what you think about caresses. Do you think caresses are required or optional?
Required.
Absolutely.
Required.
Why do you think they're required?
One of the articles mentioned skin-to-skin contact,
Mm-hmm.
making the child feel more secure. I can't remember which article it was, but I know it specifically mentioned some type of skin-to-skin contact helping with development.
It definitely helps with bonding too. Like I know whenever I first had my children, like I wanted to breastfeed, so that was one of the first things that they did as soon as they were born, before they even took them to bathe them, was just put them onto my skin so that I could hold them and just kind of caress them and things.
That's really, really nice, because I'm just, sorry, anecdote, I'm digressing for a minute, but my best friend just had a baby, and they would not, at the hospital that she was at, they wouldn't let her do that. They took the baby away.
I would have been like, no.
Yeah, it did. It absolutely ripped her heart out. I mean, I think that there were some extenuating circumstances, but not enough really to. I mean, she was healthy, she was fine, but
yeah, like I understand if there's like some complications, like if the child comes out blue and they've got to like go and make sure it's okay and things like that. Like if the baby's healthy, then just give that baby to its mama.
I know.
A lot of the hospitals. I'm sorry. A lot of the hospitals even encourage skin-to-skin contact in dealing with the fathers. I know with my firstborn son, they had my husband take his shirt off so they could do what they called kangarooing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they put him on his chest so that he could kind of have that skin-to-skin contact and establish that relationship literally as soon as he came outside of the womb.
Yeah, and I mean, all of that helps to form that basis of attachment. I mean, the baby can absolutely smell. They can smell in the womb. So when they get out of the womb, they're just smelling more smells, and it's definitely kind of this harsh, transition. But whatever you can do to help with that, and skin to skin contact is definitely one of those ways. You'll see the video when we get to the next unit on pregnancy and birth, but babies are so sensitive to smell, and it's so, the desire to be close to their mom is so innate that there is actually this thing that they call the breast crawl, and soon as the baby is born, you can still even have the umbilical cord attached or not, but you can lay that baby on the abdomen of the mother, and it will slowly, inch by inch, it takes time. I think the video is like 15 minutes, but slowly but surely they will, through, because they can't really even see at that point. They can see a little bit, but not much. They've been in darkness, for 9 months or so. And but just their sense of smell and that touch will crawl up the mother's abdomen and find their breast for the breast milk. It is completely innate. It is a total reflex, and it's kind of amazing when you actually watch it. But yes, it goes in that category of that skin-to-skin contact and those caresses, and so things like hugs. What about hugs? Required?
Definitely required.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of that love, part of that skin-to-skin contact. Kisses.
It seems like it also helps ground the baby, because otherwise, I mean, this may use a weird example, like it kind of just feels like it's floating out there, but when you hug it, you're like grounding it, so it feels secure, like it's there, kind of.
Yeah, it's that physical emotion is very, very important. So what about kisses?
I think kisses are dependent on like how healthy people are around them. Like I know that that's pretty much the same with anything, but like I've seen so many articles about like a random aunt or uncle kissing a baby and then getting them very, very sick and stuff. So I think that depends on who's kissing the baby.
I also
I
think,
think
that
it's
kind of
also
impossible
dependent on the child.
On the infant? Or you're saying like when they're older?
When they're older, like I have like my 2-year-old, I could not kiss that child if my life depended on it. But my 5-year-old, even since he was tiny, will let me kiss him.
Yeah, and some of that is also that differentiation of self. That's like, hey, I'm my own person. You could, so some of that is developmental as well. But kisses essentially goes into that category of, especially with infants, building that attachment, the caresses, the hugs. So what about words? Words and more words.
Yes.
Very
Those are
important.
hard.
Definitely due to, I know the video we watched, I believe it was the TED Talk, talked about pruning and how learning a certain language will be based on the child, the caregiver talking to the child, so that way they can develop and have an understanding and grow all those neurons and synapses and all that stuff.
Yeah, it is really, really important. I lost my.
Yeah, also with the linguistics genius video, I think, about babies is what it was called.
Yes.
And she talked about the critical learning periods for language in infants.
Yes.
And how they learn better when they see actual people talking words instead of off a TV or something like that.
Yes. Was anybody surprised by that research? I wanted to check in about that.
I
wasn't.
Especially, I feel like I've missed the boat with my kids learning another language.
I wasn't really all that surprised about it, just because my son has a speech delay, and whenever he was really, really little, my husband was working at night constantly, so it kind of felt like I wasn't really talking as much because there wasn't anyone to talk to in the house. So like I would talk to him some, and I would read to him and do things like that, but it's been a very big change, like with my daughter when she was born, because my husband was home at the same time I was home. So there was more conversation. And even though I was talking to her just as much, her speech is developing way faster than his was. So I definitely feel like the more words you're saying around them and just communicating with each other definitely plays into that.
Yeah,
I just thought it was, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It kind of makes me think about children being sponges. So if you're using vocabulary and linguistics around them, they're going to soak up that in their environment. And of course, that's going to enable them to, learn that. That's going to be, implanted in their brain. Absolutely.
I think the most interesting thing is, like, especially in the time that we're raising our children where it's heavily screen-based or technology-based, that, even with like the baby Einstein and the baby Mozart, that these programs still don't benefit the child as much as face-to-face interaction. And like knowing that research, I feel like we're kind of like preying on new parents in terms of, marketing, because we're like, oh, hey, use this and your child will learn 500 different languages, when it still doesn't replace that personal interaction.
Nothing trumps human relationships and human contact when you're talking about brain development, and that goes for adolescents as well. There is no replacement for that interaction, and that's one of the reasons why I love that video so much, besides kind of hilarious, the hairdryer from Mars and all that kind of stuff. But it is so clear, research is so clear on that even the auditory, so it's visual and auditory, there's no change. There is no change in language acquisition. So it's almost as if they're not even hearing those words. There's something, we kind of got into a debate earlier in class this morning about, what is it about the brain that pretty much can only hear the voice coming from another human in terms of development. Later they can get it. Later kids can watch and they understand it's a movie, and they can, or whatever it is, they can understand what words people are saying and things like that. But when they're infants, it doesn't seem to have that same reaction as a human. So it's I think it's really, really fascinating, but it's one of the key things. And it's also a challenge to you all to remember things like this moving forward when you look at other interventions and programs. So yes, today we're talking about Baby Einstein and expensive toys and things like that. But what about, the latest trauma treatment, practice, or, you go to a training and, you hear about some evidence and, what is the quality of the evidence? Really being able to analyze this moving forward is huge, because there are people and agencies and companies that will prey on vulnerable folks like new moms, and say, here, buy this product, buy X, Y, and Z intervention, buy this, buy that. And the stuff around the brain, I see billboards even just around Nashville advertising things that it kind of scares me. I don't know what that is, but I know a lot of parents are going to, it's like autism treatment for brain stimulation, this, that, or the other. And I don't know what the evidence behind that is. And I don't know how much, parents are really able to look for that. So it's important to be able to really, challenge what you're hearing as well. So what about play? Is play required or optional?
Required.
Why is play required?
That's how children learn.
Yeah. That was one thing with my son's speech delay. That was one of the things that we picked up, was that we could pick up all of these learning tools and activities and things like that, but actual playing with him has benefited his speech so much more than ABC Mouse or any of those little online tools that you can pick up. Those are helpful and beneficial, but not nearly as much as actual play is.
One of the things that concerns me about play is that it's essentially disappeared from kindergarten.
It's so sad. It makes me so sad. It's just another example of the evidence. I mean, there's so much research on academic success, especially with gender differences. I've read things about like boys specifically needing 2 recesses where girls can kind of get away with 1. It's just kind of this play it's mission critical. It always makes me think about baby lions. It's like they're these little lion cubs and they just play, they tussle around, and what they're doing is they're learning how they learn how to be adult lions. And children really aren't any different. They need that interaction. They need that stimulation to grow those different neural connections and help to shape their brain. It's absolutely critical. And we don't need to be on all the time either. We need that kind of free thinking and kind of there's a creativity in play that is very, very important, where you're not necessarily following directions, being able to kind of think for yourself and try and experiment and things like that are really beneficial too. Go ahead.
I think it's kind of consideration.
Sorry, there's a couple people talking at first. I can't. Patricia, can you?
Yes. Like for my daughters, they were learning English. We used to play because we speak Spanish. So when they were learning English, we used to play these different games for them to start learning, like their colors. It was a game like it had little people on the little things, and you would ask for like a person that has glasses, then they would put all those that have glasses on. So they started learning, that was just one of the games, and I saw that it was very helpful. So we just started getting different kinds of games for them to learn.
Yeah. So you learn through play. It's something I think that we all can relate to. But you're right. From a policy standpoint, this is a good example about what is the evidence saying about what we need versus what are the policies that we have supporting. So it's a little that we can get into that another time. What about predictability? Is that required?
Ideal.
Required.
Yeah.
And part of routine, I'm assuming. So I think that's a big, as far as development, I think that's important.
Part of, what did you say before that, Kendria?
Routine, isn't it a part of setting routine?
Yes.
That's important.
Yes. Yes, very much so. Just being able to predict. Anybody ever see a 3-year-old that wants to watch the same movie over and over and over and over again? You've all heard "Let It Go" 16,000 times. So it's predictability is important to decrease that stress, and we want our amygdala as calm as possible. We want it to work. We want it very functional, but we don't want it to be stimulated all the time in a negative way. And so that lack of routine and unpredictability, it's very troubling to, when you're talking about attachment, early brain development. What about reading?
I'd say required. And I think your point about being able to read if you're not literate, I mean, my kids had picture books, and it's really hard to read a picture book, but you figure it out, you know what I mean? I think that the biggest concern is probably like accessibility to the resources to be able to reach your child. So, some people can have a ton of books or access to their libraries, but then there's people that don't. So it's sort of like, how do you resolve that?
In Tennessee, there's actually the Imagination Library. That helps quite a bit because you get free books every month. They don't base it on your income or anything like that. They just, you sign up for it a lot of times in the hospital, like right after you've given birth. It's in that packet of papers that they give you that you just sign off on, and they'll send you free books. And my kids love those.
Dolly's done an amazing work with that, and all of that is the access issue. It's really important, but again, it's like, even if you have a book or 2 books, or I mean, honestly, even if you have a paper or a magazine or anything, it's that give and take, that serve and return, that back and forth, that is really, really important. And reading is part of it. We will talk about this when we get into the early childhood unit, but just a little teaser here about reading. The longitudinal research shows that how you predict basically how a kid is doing in kindergarten predicts how they're going to do in 3rd grade. How they do in 3rd grade predicts how they're going to do in 8th grade, and how they do in 8th grade predicts how they're going to do in high school, whether or not they're going to drop out, likelihood of that kind of things. So everything, think about it like the Grand Canyon. Everything is like sedimentary rock. It's all layers upon layers upon layers. And so if the brain is developing from the back to front and inside out, everything that happens when you're 3 is built on a foundation of everything that happened when you were 2 and when you were 1. And so your ability to read and to learn and to self-regulate and to have that emotional regulation, and we'll talk about the marshmallow test and all the ability to resist that instant gratification is absolutely huge in your ability to kind of perform academically and socially as you age. So these early years, I can't stress it enough how important they are. Okay, so I'm eating into the group presentation time, so we'll just finish this up real quick. So what about baby Einstein?
Not required.
Optional.
Optional. Mozart.
Optional.
Optional.
Flashcards.
Optional.
Optional, but beneficial.
Yeah. Museum trips.
I think those are beneficial, but they're optional. Like, I think that my kids learn quite a bit hands-on wise whenever we go to museums, because I talk to them, we're engaging in things. So, I mean, they're important, but they're not required, I guess.
And part of it is, yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
I think they all can supplement, what is required. That's why they're optional, but they can help. They can help enhance more. That's just my 2 cents worth. So.
Yeah, well, and part of the, this is all kind of, subjective to a certain degree, but when you look at something like museum trips, it's there to also challenge you. That example is provided to challenge you to think, well, does it have to be a museum, or is it really about the expansiveness and quality of the experiences that that kid is having. So it could be a state park that's free to go to. It could be, you know, a park, nature. It could be a friend's house. It could be, you know, but whatever it is, the critical piece that you're varying the experiences, and the more secure that attachment is, the easier it's going to be for that kid to kind of go out and explore these different things, to feel comfortable out in these different environments. Does it have to be a museum? Not necessarily, but, you know, a museum is a kind of a place of sort of concentrated diversity of experience in a way. There's so many different that a kid could experience, especially with something like Adventure Science Center or those like children's museums that just have all of these different, you know, things for kids to experience. Okay, lastly, what about expensive toys?
Optional
Unnecessary.
unless they come in a really good cardboard box.
I just hate how hard they are to open. So yeah, so it's not required for toys to be expensive, but we would hope that they, oh no, did I freeze? Y'all froze. Oh gosh. Can y'all hear me? Oh no. Hello?
We're having some technical
Ground
difficulties.
control.
I think she's back.
Major.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about that. All right.
Houston, we have a problem.
Just in time. Yeah, sorry about that. Back just in time for the group presentation. So I don't know why I'm having tech difficulties. This is rare, but
Professor, I was trying to say a link. I was trying to say a cheap Lincoln log is just as expensive as a $200 Lego set. It works just as well. So
right, exactly. I know my grandmother used to she used to make me blocks. She used to just have pieces of wood that were cut, and she would paint them different colors, and she would cut them into different shapes, and they were completely homemade, and I love them more than any other blocks.
yeah,
So,
we grew up the same way.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's turn it over to our second group. So, we're in group 2. So do y'all, let me get set up real quick. Are y'all ready to? Y'all ready?
Should we go ahead and start?
Yeah.
How about as ready as we're going to be?
All right. Let me get my thing set up here. Sorry. Okay, I am ready.
Okay, here we go.
Introduce yourself, please.
Okay, so I'm Charity.
I'm Brandy.
And I'm going to share my screen for you guys to follow along with our PowerPoint.
There we go.
All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yes.
All right, and Steve's gonna start us off.
Obviously, we're talking about brain development this week. So some things about brain development occurs from conception to the mid-20s. Bear with me. Develops architecturally. It's kind of like a house. If you think like if the brain stem's your foundation, it develops good, then everything kind of builds on top of each other. So when we say architectural, we're thinking it builds like a house. However, the previous areas develop affects the other areas development. So if you have a soft spot, it could affect the rest of the development. And damage to a specific region can have specific repercussions. We're going to get into more of that in a little bit. Next slide, I guess, please. Next, we're going to talk about the good old cerebral cortex. Everybody has probably seen this in high school or bachelor's degree level, so it's more review. But there's 4 lobes that the cerebral cortex is made up of. You have the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the frontal lobe. All these were required for different functions and different senses. For our assignment, we're going to talk mainly of the frontal lobe, and I believe that Brandy is going to talk more about that.
Okay, so the frontal lobe controls a lot of important characteristics that makes up your personality. Some consider it the emotional control center. Effective control functions from the frontal lobe injury could be ability to focus and pay attention, concentration, verbal and nonverbal language, sensory and motor functions, as well as judgment. So damage to the frontal lobe, of course, it can impact many abilities, controlling impulses and movements, loss of motor skills, loss of simple movement of various body skills like the strength of your arms, hands, or fingers, hand-eye coordination as well, almost like being paralyzed, as well as improper sequencing, inability to plan like complex sequences that requires multiple step tasks. So basically anything that requires multiple steps, it'll have to be like very simple. Communication with peers. Overall communication with peers will be affected. Relationships will undergo changes due to the inability to properly express your thoughts verbally as well as non-verbally. Fewer facial motions will take place. You won't always be able to match an expression or emotion with a thought. Regulation of mood. Mood swings will happen. Since the frontal lobe is considered the emotional control system, it will become harder to control behaviors. Personality may seem emotionless. Focus for the required task. Problem solving and decision making will become more difficult than usual. Attention spans become shorter than normal due to the frontal lobe and also the undeveloped dorsal prefrontal cortex, which focuses on your ability to pay attention.
Okay, so traumatic brain injury. Anytime you have a traumatic brain injury, the location of the injury and the severity of the injury can make a difference on how a person is going to be impacted. But as was already said, a person, you can have a outgoing person who is, just really kind of a social butterfly who enjoys going out and socializing with people, have some type of brain injury, and it just completely changes who they are. So they might be withdrawn, they might be more quiet, they might prefer just to stay home and not socialize as much. Some of the symptoms that a person can have from a traumatic brain injury is physical symptoms like headaches and dizziness, but then within about either right away or certainly within a month, you might notice that a person's having issues with their memory. They're not remembering things as well. They're not being able to form new memories. And then you also notice things like depression and anxiety, or oftentimes people become more irritable. They're more aggressive than they used to be. So you see that quite a bit. And so because of the complexity of the brain and all the functions that are controlled, and you have some processes that are controlled by multiple locations in the brain. So anytime you have a traumatic brain injury, there's going to be serious consequences to that. One of the things that we learned, though, is that brains aren't considered fully developed until mid-20s, roughly around age 25. So if you've got someone under age 25 who has a traumatic brain injury, there is still a good chance that because their brain is still developing, they're still able to make connections. They can still learn new ways to do things. So they can learn new tasks that help them concentrate, that help them regulate their moods. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that real quick. And we are going to go into our skit. So I am Dr. Montgomery from Traumatic Brain Injury Recovery Center, and I treat patients who suffer from traumatic brain injury. My next client is a 17-year-old high school senior. He and his mom will be here any moment. Oh, there they are. Good afternoon. Well, hi, guys. Welcome to the Traumatic Brain Injury Recovery Center. I'm Dr. Montgomery, and I'll be your family therapist today. What can I do for you guys?
Hey, recently my son suffered a brain injury to the frontal cerebral cortex due to a car crash. Since then, things haven't been the same. Since receiving the news of possible changes and the effects it will have on his social life, haven't been the same. We've tried our hardest to cope and make things seem normal as possible. However, it hasn't worked. Adam's behavior has changed tremendously. Lately, he hasn't been the happy, cheerful Adam that we know. He's been very sad and quiet. Adam is a senior in high school, and our biggest fear is Adam won't be able to enjoy his last year in school. We feel due to the car incident, he will socially be restricted. The neurologist tried to explain what's going on in Adam's brain, but we don't fully understand. Can you help us?
Sure. Thank you for that information. I understand your concern. Adam, how do you feel about what you know about that? Any thoughts you'd like to share?
I just feel sad. I'm scared I'm not going to be able to do the things that, I'm used to doing. I'm scared that my friends are not going to be friends with me anymore. I'm just really down all the time, really depressed, really sad.
Okay. So, Adam, I understand that you feel sad because things have changed. You don't think people are going to like you or accept you. And Susan, I understand you've received information on Adam's condition. However, today I'm going to help you digest the information a little better, as well as let you know what to expect. Adam suffers from an injury to his frontal cerebral cortex. The frontal cerebral cortex is a part of the brain that controls the emotional state, concentration, things like attention, personality traits, and judgment, so impulse control. With limited control over such important characteristics, socializing may indeed be difficult for Adam. The prefrontal cortex, which is located in the very front of the brain, right behind the forehead, is the last part of the brain to develop. We often use an architecture metaphor for the brain. It compares brain development to building a house. A solid foundation on a house needs to be laid before the next part can be built. And the brain is the same way. It's like a building. The brain develops from the bottom all the way to the top. And doctors agree that the process isn't really complete until a person's about age 25. So with the frontal cerebral cortex damaged and the prefrontal cerebral cortex not fully developed, it becomes even harder to display certain characteristics. Adam's altered behavior isn't unusual. Due to the accident, he has less control over personality traits. The undeveloped ventral prefrontal cortex will cause Adam's emotional state to change a bit. The dorsal prefrontal cortex focuses on one's ability to pay attention, so you might already be aware of shorter attention spans. Ability to concentrate on things for a long period of time may be hindered, so that can make studying difficult. I know earlier in the session you both expressed concerns about Adam's ability to continue at school, maintain his relationships with his peers, and participate in social activities. And I understand the information I have given you may be overwhelming, and perhaps even a little frightening, and I understand. But Adam may still be able to continue relationships and do well in school. Although there have been some obvious changes, continued support from family and friends will help your son adjust. And also, the fact that Adam's brain is still developing is really good news. His brain's plasticity enables new connections to form and new associations to be made. So with the right treatment, Adam will have a healthy adjustment. Are you ready to discuss your treatment options? So our question that we pose to the class now is, what kind of treatment would you recommend to Adam and Susan? Go ahead, anybody.
So I know there is a computer game, I guess you can call it, that people take if they've ever experienced TBI. And what it is it shows the shapes up on the computer, and you kind of click as to what you can remember. And it'll just kind of gauge on what your memory is. So that is something that he can do, is kind of memory games to try to help kind of rebuild that damage since he's able to, since he's so young. So that's one thing.
It's a good one. Anyone else got something?
I think I would recommend that his mother has friends come to visit him on a regular basis. So if they're talking to him like nothing's necessarily happened, I feel like, again, going back to, I mean, that's obviously he's not an infant, but that face-to-face interaction with people who care about him might help with some of the recovery in the brain.
I was going to say that too. I was thinking that getting him more involved in more social activities and interactions might help him develop or redevelop new connections. You know, since his frontal lobe isn't all the way developed yet, then keeping him social and active and maintaining that family and social support probably would be really helpful to him in his future development.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to share?
I noticed, given that the area is the frontal lobe and it covers things such as involuntary movements and things like that that could be an issue. Based on the CT, I'm not sure how severe it is, but with him, I would practice some either sit still or just walk around and have control of his movements to see how severe the issue is. And then I would also work on doing things like having conversation with him and seeing if he's having any issues with writing things down or in understanding what he's writing to kind of see where he is.
Good one.
I would also stress to the parents, I guess, that, you know, that frontal lobe damage, you know, all damage is different and it can cause different side effects, and that not all of them are bad. You know, some people develop new talents and strengths from their injuries.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Deficits. So that would be a good thing to tell the parents.
Yep.
Something I saw a lot of like extreme cases of prefrontal cortex when I was looking online, and what I noticed is that they couldn't really contain their impulsive behavior. So they made a full recovery, like physically, but they couldn't hold down a job. They had no way to support themselves. They were just really impulsive people. So, but if the parents maintain a positive factor in their life and kind of help them kind of curb that behavior, that can be really important for the parents to know.
Kind of going off of what Courtney said, I kept thinking about Phineas Gage. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you were talking, and the whole time I was just like, Phineas Gage, Phineas Gage. I couldn't get image out of my head, but that was definitely something that he experienced. He was sort of a nice fellow, and then railroad spike went through his head, and after that he just couldn't keep a job anymore. He used to be very focused, everything else, and yeah, that's definitely something that they would need to watch for and work for with him. It's just that, you know, he might, you know, be a little bit more irritable, and it might be a little harder for him to do things, but they just need to be patient with him.
Yeah, I remember that story because everybody that he worked with said he was like this big loving teddy bear. Went through the injury, he was just real aggressive and irritable, and yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, it was shocking that he even lived, because that was the 1800s. So I mean, I was just shocked that he lived in general.
Yeah, shot right through his brain.
What about cognitive behavioral therapy just for the behavior aspect that his parents are concerned about, the change in behavior? Might be helpful for him to see a counselor so that he could perhaps be in a neutral environment where he could express his feelings and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable talking about things that he might not necessarily feel comfortable discussing with his family or even his friends.
Sure. Yeah, and we had somebody else comment too down in the chat, getting him in a support group with other people that have been through that, because that's actually beneficial it would be beneficial to Adam, but it would be beneficial to the whole group too, because the more socializing that they're able to do with other people, that teaches them how to communicate, how to regulate their mood and that kind of thing. So that's a good option too. There's a lot of different ways that I feel a parent or a therapist could go with this because I feel like it's a case-by-case situation, because you never know exactly how somebody's going to be affected. You don't know how bad the injury is, it could just be, the aggression or impulsivity, or it could be a completely different person that you end up with. So the more treatment that you can have with socializing and doing like the memory games, concentration, things like that. And then I was just kind of looking online to see what options there were out there, because I was just curious. And one of the things I had found were with recreational therapists who actually their main job is to take these people and give them creative tasks and put them in situations where they have to develop all those new skills and make those new connections. So the more help that we could get Adam or someone, that's been through that would definitely be more beneficial. And then somebody else mentioned also that if they're having issues with memories, looking at photo albums to try to recall memories that they've had with their friends or their family, and that's a good one too.
I would also say just kind of flipping the script, looking at support for like the family as well, like because it's going to be a stressful situation to have a child that they're help with their memory loss and all that stuff. So just end up making support as well, so they don't get burnt out.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't imagine what it would be like for a parent to have to experience something like that with their child, and then they want the best for their child too, so that can weigh on them and be stressful for them too also. So you want them to have whatever resources they can access also, because the better they are, the better they can be with their child. Anyone else?
Hi. The other thing I was thinking of was that's the study we read with the TBIs and rats and all the experimenting that they did. One thing that stood out with me were the rats that had anxiety. They like not having them in social groups and introducing them to new environments made them more anxious. So I would say maybe if there's some sort of anxiety being experienced, just try to keep everything familiar, like his surroundings, and not go into new environments that might cause some of these symptoms.
Right. So maybe if you've got a kid who is really social and in a lot of different activities, rather than trying to find a bunch of new activities for him to participate in, try to help him form new ways to keep those interactions, so to go to those same places and partake in those same activities.
I had that experience with one of my daughters. She had like concussion, and at first she couldn't recognize me or her sister and things at first. And since that was going on, I hurried up and went to go see my son so she can see her brothers. And she couldn't. This was the day after that, so after her fall, and she couldn't recognize them. So I tried doing that, taking her to familiar places with familiar people, but it seemed like it gave her more anxiety. So we would have to leave, because they would go up to her and talk to her she wouldn't have any idea who that person was. So, so then we just, backed up a little bit and just started going little by little. Mm-hmm.
That sounds kind of like I think it's called maybe exposure therapy. So, like you introduce a little bit at a time. I don't know a whole lot about it, but you just have to take kind of baby steps instead of a giant leap back into the same environment.
Right.
I feel like it would definitely make, again, it'd be a case-by-case instance. I mean, if you've got someone who you start off slow and make small changes, take small steps first, you can typically figure out how much they're struggling, and you can kind of go back from there if you need to, because you just never know how people are going to react, and you don't know what kind of situations are going to cause them more anxiety or
Okay, well, are there any last comments before we wrap up the group presentation?
I had just one. I know that some therapists they communicate with the children like when they're doing arts and crafts, because they tend not to stress as much. So with them like doing a craft or coloring, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
With them doing that, they could like concentrate a little bit more and then focus on like what they remember for possibly, let's say, just the day before, or any issues that they feel, or just to communicate a little bit better.
I'm not sure who was just discussing that. Was that Victoria that said that? Anyways, my field placement will be in a high school, and they actually use those methods for teenagers as well. I didn't realize, but when I was meeting with the person I was going to be working with a few weeks ago, she actually had like Play-Doh and kinetic sand, stress balls, and she said that all of the teens that she works with utilize those, and it helps them to be able to get things off their chest while they're, focused on doing some art type craft things at the same time.
So there's a lot to consider here. Charity and Brandy and Steve, do you have any wrap up things or?
No, I don't think so. I don't.
No, I think I'm good. Everything that I thought about saying, somebody else said. So, like I'll have telepathy or something.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. So, this is a really tricky CTE because it is so specific about, and also you have extremely limited information about, what is the injury, what's going on. You pretty much only just kind of know the name, the age of the kid and things like that. And so, when you're in practice and you're faced with a lot of unknowns, and also it's important to understand that, you're always going to be in a place where you don't know something. And so understanding the resources and information that's available to you to avail yourself of to help you further your understanding so that you can be supported by the parents. You are not getting a degree in neuroscience because we're talking about, brain development and epigenetics and things like that, for a few weeks. That's, your role is how do you help? And just like you said, Charity, at the beginning of your skit is, we're here to help you digest this information. And so the critical role there, obviously it's somewhat, agency specific and context specific, but, you're not there to be the doctor. You're there to kind of help the family adjust to a new normal and get through a challenging time. But being well prepared with understanding some of the details about what that family is going through. So like things like brain development, you're going to be able to help that family digest more. So it's like it's this kind of constant balance between staying grounded in your area of competence as a social worker, which of course is one of our code of ethics, values in social work practice, and not stepping outside that competence area, and going to the research, seeing what's available, not assuming that what works for one person with a TBI is going to work for another person with a TBI. I think Patricia was saying, had a great example of what happened in her own family of being around people that knew her when she didn't know them was extremely anxiety producing, but that may be comforting for somebody else. So, and also teasing out, what is sort of normal adolescent development. I mean, kids can be depressed, can isolate, you've got hormones going on. So what is really normal versus being clinically or medically connected to the injury. So there's a lot to kind of tease out with this specific TBI. So, with the specific CTE, too many acronyms floating around. So I think y'all did a great job of just kind of piecing out the kind of beginnings of all of that information and staying grounded in we're here to support you, and I appreciated the challenge question. That was good, and everybody participating. So, all right, so if there are no further questions, we will wrap it up for this evening and have about 13 minutes for general office hours questions. So are there any non-office hour questions or comments before I stop recording? All right,